Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. The federal government shutdown has prompted a handful of tribes to declare states of emergency as they struggle to adequately provide services like food and heating assistance to their citizens. Challenges tribes are enduring since the shutdown are also the subject of a new report that calls for a more reliable system for allocating money that the federal government is obligated to send to tribes. We'll get updates coming up after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. The Navajo Nation is bracing for the gap in SNAP benefits. It's yet another food insecurity problem for tribal members living on the sprawling reservation. KJZZ's Gabriel Pietrozio has more.
With only a dozen or so stores throughout the nation, buying groceries is already a daily struggle, but letting benefits lapse could make their dilemma much worse. A third of Navajo households depend on SNAP today. Thomas Cody is with the Navajo Division of Child and Family Services.
We're 400,000 strong, and we can get through this together.
Meanwhile, the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma has declared a state of emergency
due to this federally imposed food crisis.
Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. made almost $7 million available. As for the Navajo Nation, Cody says it's unclear whether they'll follow suit.
We're coordinating right now with our legislators and our executive branch. And I don't know if there will be a declaration, but we're exploring all avenues to assist our people.
For National Native News, I'm Gabriel Pietrozio.
On Monday, the Cherokee Nation announced the expansion of its Emergency Cash Assistance Program to all Cherokee Nation citizens on SNAP nationwide. The tribe says it will adjust payments as the federal government partially pays benefits in November. The deadline to apply is November 14th. In a recent ceremony, clan leaders and carvers dedicated the latest pole in Sealaska Heritage Institute's Kutia Dei Juneau's Totem Pole Trail. KTOO's Yvonne Crumry has more.
Inside the clan house in the Walter Soboleff building, Suktuneti clan members stand in front of a large poster depicting a totem pole that represents their clan history. They offer thanks to other clans, carvers, and SHI leadership. The actual pole, called a kutia in Tlingit, was raised near Juneau's Overstreet Park, but organizers held the dedication inside due to weather. Edward Thomas is Suktuneti, and he says he's excited to see his clan join the handful of others already represented by the Kutia Dei.
As I look at the walk of the totem pole along the waterfront here, I'm proud to see that all of our clans are being represented.
Thomas went on to thank the carver, Louis Wallace, and his apprentices for the thought and work they put into the pole. Wallace is a Haida master carver and lives in Saxman. But he says this kutia is a part of his family's legacy, too.
My great-grandfather has a totem pole in the state building, Dwight Wallace. My grandfather, John Wallace, has a totem pole that was outside the City Museum. So now with this particular kutia pole, there's 3 generations of Wallace totem poles standing here in Juneau.
Wallace was helped by apprentices, including his son, Charles Peel. And Peel holds the youngest member of the carving team, his 5-year-old daughter, Jod Senga Elizabeth, as he describes the design of the pole.
And at the top, we have the current clan leaders. We want to acknowledge that this is the representation of a living people, that this isn't just something that's from the past. This is something that's tying history together. We often look at totem poles as things that are coming back from the past, and we wanted to add a piece that represents the present.
Below the current clan leaders, the pole features a spirit man, raven, and a box that represents the abundance of knowledge and history held in the Suktuneti clan, whose homelands are near Cake. At the base is the clan crest, dog salmon swimming in tall grasses. The National Park Service funded this pole. SHI plans to raise a total of 30 poles along Juneau's waterfront. So far, 13 poles have been installed. In Juneau, I'm Yvonne Crumry.
And I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by AARP, whose Family Caregiver Resource Guide is available to caregivers by calling 877-333-5885 or at aarp.org/caregiver-resources. Support by Sonosky Chambers Law, championing tribal sovereignty and Native American rights since 1976. From opioids litigation to treaty rights to tribal self-governance. With offices in Washington, D.C., New Mexico, California, and Alaska. Sonosky Chambers Law.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Shawn Spruce. The Yurok tribe joins a growing list of tribes declaring a state of emergency because of the federal government shutdown, which is on track to be the longest on record. Tribes are citing concerns over disruptions to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, delays for heating subsidies for citizens, and a large number of federal employees missing paychecks. And at least one report states tribes are feeling the brunt of the shutdown more than the rest of the population. That's because money tribes rely on from the federal government is less reliable than many other government-funded programs. Many tribes are feeling the grind of 35 days without funds and federal staff support. Today on our show, we'll get the latest updates from tribal leaders and Native policy analysts about the effects of the current government shutdown on Native Americans. Listeners can join us with a comment or question by calling 1-800-996-2848. 1-800-996-2848. That number's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now from the lower Klamath River on the Yurok Reservation in California is Joseph James. He is the chairman of the Yurok tribe. Chairman James, good morning, and welcome to Native America Calling.
Skianakoi, Sean. Good morning.
It's great to have you on the show, sir. Now, the Yurok tribe just declared a state of emergency because of the government shutdown. What's the main driver of that declaration?
Yeah, thank you, Sean. The main drive is the shutdown of the government and the lack of resources and funding, the cutoff to SNAP. The Yurok tribe and its tribal members are greatly impacted by that. With that, the Yurok Tribal Council has declared a state of emergency to address this food crisis that's impacting us here at Yurok on the lower Klamath River.
Now, SNAP benefits ran out on Saturday. The Trump administration now says it will only partially cover SNAP benefits, but it could take several weeks to get that operational again. Can your citizens who rely on SNAP manage that scenario?
Sean, the Yurok tribe is working on a plan. They're going to be releasing a plan today to help out our tribal citizens with food, with monetary food cards. Again, with the state of emergency, for us, it's all hands on deck to help our tribal citizens. It is a food crisis that's impacting us in real time. And Sean, it's not also just the food, right? We're talking about tribal members, our citizens. It's going to be, do we pay our food? Do we pay our utility? Do we pay our mortgage? Do we pay our car payment? It is a domino effect. And our tribal members, we have the holidays, we have November, you have December coming up. This has impacted us in real time. Again, we're advocating for help and assistance on our end. We're advocating for the government to reopen, but at the same time, as a tribal chair and as a tribal leader, we're going to put everything we've got with our resources to help our tribal citizens that have been impacted by this food crisis.
Thank you, Chairman James. How prepared was the tribe for this shutdown? And I'm curious to know, how much longer can you folks hold up in the event of a prolonged or more prolonged shutdown?
Well, we want it to end tomorrow, but we'll see. We've laid out a plan. Unfortunately, this is not as we know in Indian country and even across the nation, it's not the first time the federal government has been shut down. So we've been through this a couple of times. So again, we put some resources and funding off to the side to help out our members for a couple months. The holidays and this time of the year is important to us. important to all of us. Again, you're talking about family coming together. This has an impact not just for the Yurok tribe, Indian country, but the country. You're talking about the economy. People are going to make choices. We're going to stay home and feed our people. Families are going to stay home and feed their people. And so we're talking about the SNAP and this food crisis, but there is a domino effect here that is impacting us here at Yurok.
Do you have a sense for how other tribes in California are faring?
Our brothers and sisters have also a couple of tribes. I can't speak for them. They have declared a state of emergency, and again, they're rallying their efforts regarding food to them. Again, we on our end for the Yurok tribe, we brought our housing authority, we brought our social service, we brought our TANF program, we brought our court team in, our council, all our administrative, putting our best foot forward to help out our tribal citizens, not just with the food cards, the fall harvest feast that we have, food baskets, looking at, again, our commodities, and again, we're rallying at our end.
Chairman, how long do you expect the state of emergency to remain in effect? Until the shutdown ends?
We put it in place until the government shutdown does end. We planned for that. We're planning for the worst at the end of the day. But again, we want the government to reopen, and it is impacting us in real time. In real time, when we talk about the month of November and December, and along with the mental health side of it too, that comes up during those months. There's a lot of things in play and at stake here that our members are going through, and we're trying to relieve them. Say, hey, don't stress about this. Because we're here at the Yurok tribe going to help our tribal members as a tribal chair, as a tribal leader on behalf of our tribe.
Do you have any tribal citizens who are federal employees who are not getting paid at present?
We do. We do. And again, they're impacted and they're going through it. We're making sure every resource is available for them to get through this difficult time.
Chairman, today, Election Day, and there is a ballot measure to realign districts in favor of Democrats. What does that do for your tribe?
Sean, I'm more concentrating on, I'm aware of that, the state of California. It is Election Day here in California on that. We're analyzing that, but our concentration today in this week is on SNAP and providing food to our people.
All right, I understand, Chairman. And I also know your time is limited this morning, so I want to be respectful. Anything else you want to share with our listeners before we bring on another guest?
I just want to highlight it's a food crisis that's impacting us. But when you talk about food, we're talking about feeding our people, or paying our utility, or paying our rent, paying our mortgage, or paying our car. Those things that are in play right now, it's a domino effect, and that's just not impacting Indian country. It's going to impact resources, funding outside of Indian country. So yes, we are talking about SNAP, but I wanted to let the people and the listeners know, and the powers that be, this is impacting all of us. And again, encourage the government to reopen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Joseph James of the Yurok tribe, kicking us off here on Native America Calling. The number to join the conversation, 1-800-996-2848. Let us know how your community is handling the federal shutdown. Give us a call, 1-800-99-NATIVE. Let's now head north to Anchorage, Alaska, where we have Nikki Stoops on the line. She is the Vice President of Engagement for the Alaska Federation of Natives, or AFN, and she is from the native village of Kotzebue. Nikki, good morning, and welcome to Native America Calling.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, AFN President Ben Malott, he told the Senate Indian Affairs Committee that the shutdown has potentially life-threatening implications in Alaska. What is he referring to exactly?
That's correct. He testified on October 29th, and he was testifying on the shutdown that it poses a threat to vulnerable households across the state that not only rely on SNAP, but they also rely on heating assistance. And new funding for this program will be unavailable during the shutdown, undermining a critical support system for Alaska Native families and elders during our harsh winter conditions. So in my hometown of Kotzebue, the cheapest heating fuel you can purchase is $7.79 per gallon. So for a home that has a 50-gallon heating fuel tank, it would cost about $389 plus tax to fill up that tank.
And how long will that tank last in the cold weather?
In the cold weather, it lasts less than 30 days.
Okay. Nikki, some people listening to the show right now might be thinking, well, there are Alaska Native corporations in Alaska. To what extent can tribal governments or AFCs, ANCs, fill that gap during the shutdown?
Well, the thing about Alaska, we're a large state, but we have a small population and we take care of each other. So it's been a multi-agency, multi-organization commitment that we're all working together to make sure that our people are taken care of.
What was the talk about with regard to the shutdown at the annual AFN convention that just wrapped up recently?
We had a successful convention the third week in October. It's our annual meeting. It's the largest Native American gathering in the United States, bringing over 7,000 people together. However, we had to get a little creative this year. Our convention was impacted not only by the government shutdown, but also the devastation caused by Typhoon Halong in Western Alaska. So we incorporated virtual speakers like the Department of the Interior Secretary Doug Burgum and the Secretary of the VA Doug Collins, as well as fundraising efforts for those who were evacuated from their home villages to Anchorage, some with just the clothes on their backs and many without shoes.
All right, thank you, Nikki. We're going to take a short break. We will come back. We'll talk more with Nikki Stoops, and we have a couple of other guests on the show as well. We'll introduce those folks and hear more from them. But we do have to take this short break, and I encourage listeners to join the conversation, especially right now. Anyone listening in Alaska who has thoughts or has concerns with regard to how the shutdown is impacting Alaska Native villages, you can join the conversation. Just give us a call at 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. And of course, for listeners outside of Alaska, we'd very much like to hear from you as well. I know that this federal shutdown is impacting tribes and Native communities across Turtle Island. So give us a call, 1-800-99-NATIVE. An organization is launching a new collection of documents, artifacts, and artwork that offers a better understanding of how slavery affects Native Americans and other indigenous people. Focused mainly in the Americas, the Native Bound Unbound project offers public access to an archive representing centuries of information. We'll hear more about it on the next Native America Calling.
Once agnixi makuwaza ye apiki yaniktelo. La kozani wawoki ki oboglakayo takucha yakachriki onichiapiktelo. Isama soliachihanta. Lelyayo healthcare.gov/nishlelyayo. Nishlelmas aphayo 1-800-318-2596. Lewot khaniki Medicare and Medicaid otietahi apelo.
Thank you for listening to Native America Calling. We're hearing how the current federal government shutdown is affecting tribes. And today on our show, we're talking about the unique hurdles for Native American communities. We also want to hear from you today, our listeners. How is your tribal community impacted by this shutdown? You can join us by calling 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Or you can continue the conversation on our website, nativeamericacalling.com, and our social media pages such as Facebook and Instagram. We have Nikki Stoops on the line right now. She is the Vice President of Engagement for the Alaska Federation of Natives, or AFN. And Nikki, before the break, I mentioned that we have listeners, of course, in Alaska, but we also have a lot of listeners down in the lower 48. And I'm interested in learning more about the unique hurdles that Alaska Native tribes face when it comes to the government shutdown that perhaps Native tribes in the lower 48 don't have to worry about so much.
Right. Well, the people in Alaska rely heavily on subsistence to feed our families and to fill freezers to get through the long, dark winters. Subsistence activities on federal lands are managed through the Interior Department's Federal Subsistence Board, which has canceled its regional advisory committee meetings throughout the month of October. And these meetings are critically important for governance of the subsistence system our rural Alaska Native communities depend on to survive.
What are you hearing from people at the community level in terms of the subsistence activities? What are their biggest concerns right now?
Right now, the biggest concerns are having the ability to, pay for gas, to go out to hunt for their families, to gather for their families, to be able to fill those freezers during the long winter months ahead. But as of yesterday, November 3rd, Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy issued a disaster declaration for Alaska to ensure food security. Under this declaration, STAT benefits will be deposited on a weekly basis to the 66,000 Alaskans who receive these benefits. But on the flip side of that, we are Alaska Native people who rely on subsistence activities, and being able to subsist during the long winter months is vital for our cultural and our survival.
The last time we had a prolonged federal shutdown about 7 years ago, do you remember that shutdown, and can you compare it to how this current shutdown is playing out?
I do remember that shutdown. And this one, this one is definitely, we feel the strain more as it is longer. Alaska Native entities receiving federal assistance engage in best practices to prepare for and utilize all available funding prior to a lapse in federal appropriations to keep our programs stable and our operations uninterrupted to the greatest extent possible. But when a shutdown drags on for a prolonged period, there's little we can do to keep the impacts to our organizations and communities at bay. Today we've hit over 30 days of the shutdown, and our organizations are facing difficult realities and decisions about the ability to carry out certain programs and whether tribal staff must be laid off.
So it sounds like AFN was fairly prepared, recognized that this shutdown could potentially be as long as it has at this point. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Nikki, some Native corporations and organizations have left AFN, and in recent months, some have rejoined AFN. What does that say to you right now in terms of the health of AFN and its membership?
Well, AFN is a membership organization, and members have come and gone over the years. But I think recently, with some members coming back, under our president Ben Malott, I think it speaks to how we're all stronger together and how unity is very important, especially during these times.
All right. Nikki Stoops, Vice President of Engagement for the Alaska Federation of Natives. And the number to join this conversation today is 1-800-996-2848. Let's get some calls going. I would like to hear from some of our listeners who have been impacted by the federal shutdown. Maybe your community is without federal staff to implement some services or programs. Maybe you are lacking some of the food benefits and other resources that are provided by federal resources, and you have comments to share. Or maybe you just are worried about how long this is going to continue, and you've got thoughts or you've got questions you'd like to ask. Give us a call. We'd like to hear from some listeners now. 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. We have two more guests who I want to introduce now. Joining us first on Zoom from Washington, D.C. is Liz Malerba. She is the Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs for the United South and Eastern Tribes Sovereignty Protection Fund. She is Mohegan. Liz, hello, and welcome back to the show.
Good afternoon. It's great to be with you.
Also joining us from Washington, D.C. is Robert Maxim. He is a fellow at the Brookings Institution, and he is Mashpee Wampanoag. Robert, hello to you as well. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Sean. It's great to be with you.
Liz, I want to begin with you. A report you co-authored says the shutdown affects everyone in the United States, but is particularly damaging for Native tribes. How did you and your colleagues reach that conclusion?
That's right. So it's particularly damaging for Indian country for a couple of reasons. One is tribal nations are kind of inextricably intertwined with the federal government. Trust and treaty obligations are a debt that must be paid to us by the federal government. But the federal government pays those trust and treaty obligations in the form of funds and services to us via discretionary appropriations. And I'll talk a little bit about what discretionary appropriations means. The federal budget is largely divided into two separate funding categories, mandatory and discretionary. Mandatory programs are what you would typically recognize as entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare. And discretionary funding is appropriated annually by Congress at its discretion.
Okay.
So when the federal government shuts down, those funds and those services that are, again, largely located on the discretionary side of the budget stop flowing to tribal nations.
Okay. And of course, this is no secret. I mean, we've talked about this before on the show. Not that long ago, I interviewed NCAI Chairman Mark Maccaro, and I asked him, what would it take to just have more funding in Indian country be from mandatory sources or entitlements as opposed to discretionary funding, like you mentioned? So this has obviously been an issue for many years, but it sounds like during this shutdown, it's particularly pronounced.
It certainly is. We see the compounding effects of the shutdown kind of the longer it goes on with tribal nations. You heard the chairman describe what is happening at UROC. We're seeing that across the country. And this is a moment, we think, and we call for this in the report. We think this is a moment for Congress to fundamentally re-examine how it delivers upon trust and treaty obligations to tribal nations.
Okay. And what are some thoughts in terms of our recommendations in terms of how to accomplish that? Because I know many policy experts in Indian country have been saying this for many years. Hey, look, we have got to make more of our funding for Native programs mandatory as opposed to discretionary, but it gets complicated politically.
It certainly does. You are definitely seeing Congress less inclined to enact new mandatory funding. However, there are definitely glimmers of hope in that area. Certainly in the short term, there are mechanisms that can be deployed to stabilize discretionary funding to Indian country. You talked about the last government shutdown. One of the major differences between this shutdown and the last shutdown is that during this shutdown, the Indian Health Service is fully operational due to a mechanism known as advance appropriations. In the long term, we who are advocating for better funding to tribal nations have been working with Congress and with administrations, with the executive branch, in order to move more funding toward mandatory. And we've seen Congress warm to this idea. We even saw during the Biden administration the proposal to move the Indian Health Service from discretionary funding to mandatory within the president's budget request.
Okay. Liz, what are the main areas right now that are being most impacted by the shutdown? You mentioned general functions like education, health, general economic well-being. Where are tribal citizens feeling the effects most importantly right now?
Certainly. So I can speak for USEP member tribal nations. Certainly, we've heard quite a lot about trying to bridge the gap in nutrition assistance, heating assistance. Certainly, there are also concerns related to historic preservation. So, federal employees who would oversee sacred sites protections during infrastructure projects are furloughed right now. Also, even though the Indian Health Service is fully operational, not all of the Department of Health and Human Services is fully operational, and tribal nations access funding throughout the federal government. a sort of notable side effect of the shutdown that doesn't have to do with appropriations is an authorization for health providers to bill Medicare for telehealth services to elders has lapsed. So we have tribal health clinics unable to meet elders where they're at and see them via telehealth right now.
Thank you, Liz. 1-800-996-2848. Listeners, give us a call. Join this conversation. Let us know what your concerns are with regard to the federal shutdown or how it is impacting you, your family, and your community. 1-800-99-NATIVE. Let's bring Robert Maxim into the conversation now. He is a fellow at the Brookings Institution. And Robert, what are your thoughts with regard to why tribes do not have more reliable funding from the federal government?
Hey, yeah, it's great to be with you. You know, I think a challenge here is that the federal government has been, in particular Congress, relying on discretionary funding for so long because it's a lever that Congress can pull every year. And so there are folks within Congress, but also elsewhere throughout the government that will say, this is actually the best way to run the system. We check in every year and we determine if funding levels are correct, and then we pass a bill based on that. And that's, of course, how it's supposed to, work in theory. That's how folks learned about it in Schoolhouse Rock maybe when we were kids. But that's not how it has operated in reality. And you're seeing this in particular with the shutdown. But even in, times where the government is functioning, I would say more closely to normal, our default is we just carry over last year's funding and flatline everything, or we pass bills that will only fund the government for months or even sometimes weeks at a time. And so, the logic of how this is supposed to work isn't actually what plays out for tribes, but also for the U.S. as a whole.
Okay. Robert, that was a good help me understand more about how discretionary funding is implemented. So basically just every year these budgets are presented and then they are voted on, and they either money comes in or money is increased or decreased or what have you. Now, with the mandatory spending or the entitlements, can you walk us through that process and what the timeline is for those?
Yeah, and I can give you an example of how this plays out in practice as well. But broadly speaking, when a mandatory program is enacted, the Congress passes some sort of authorizing legislation that creates a program, and it lays out a series of conditions that if you meet those conditions, you are entitled to payment under the program as prescribed by law. And so that's why it's called an entitlement. So if you qualify for Medicare, for example, if you're 65, if you meet certain health conditions, then, as long as you meet those conditions, you are entitled to the benefits that the law lays out. Now, that operates differently for discretionary programs. And again, as Liz mentioned, these are programs that Congress will fund at levels based on their own discretion. And so just to give you an example in the difference between how IHS works versus Medicare, for example, I mentioned Medicare, as long as you're qualified, you get the full suite of benefits. For IHS, in many cases, clinics or the system as a whole will get a set amount of money. And when that money's gone, it's gone. And so the end result is you see a system like IHS spends about $4,000 a year per patient. That's about half of what Medicaid spends per year on patients and about a quarter of what Medicare spends, because these other programs are structured differently to allow folks to take advantage of the full suite of benefits underneath, and that's not available in discretionary programs in many cases.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that to some people, the viewpoint is that discretionary funding is a better model for Indian country. It gives everybody once a year a chance to dial in and look at the programs and where the needs are. What's your thought on that? I mean, ultimately, is it a better method, or would mandatory be superior?
What I think from my point of view is it certainly feels like a paternalistic point of view, where the federal government thinks that it has the best view on how spending can and should be effectively allocated within Indian country. And I think folks in Indian country, for the most part, our kind of point of view is no, we want greater sovereignty and greater autonomy. We are sovereign nations, and this funding isn't based on need, and it's not based on, race or DEI or any of the other kind of topics that are hot button issues right now. It's based on treaties that are the law of the land and land that our nations, signed over to the U.S. or in some cases were taken by force. And that was a prepayment on a debt. It is now, that's why it's called an obligation, right? A trust and treaty obligation. The U.S. government is obligated to provide this funding. And so to me, that makes all of the argument you need for the mandatory funding. It's not only allowing Native people, tribes, and tribal citizens to access their full suite of benefits that the federal government is obligated to pay, but it is also the way to structure these programs to enable the maximum amount of tribal sovereignty.
All right, we're going to take another short break. And Robert, when we come back, I'm going to ask you, what will it take for Congress to make funding in Indian country mandatory? What is standing in the way of that from taking place? So again, a short break, and we will be right back. And we've got the phone lines open for listeners who would like to join our conversation, 1-800-996-2848. Federal shutdown. How's it impacting you? How's it impacting your community?
Support for journalism that raises the awareness of child well-being to citizens and to policymakers provided by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, building a brighter future for children, families, and communities. Information at aecf.org.
Kaufman & Associates has over 35 years of experience serving Indian country, supporting growth, transformation, and sustainability of tribal programs. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
You are listening to Native America Calling. We're going to continue our conversation now about the effects the federal government shutdown is having on tribes and how federal funding for tribes is not reliable. Listeners, please join us with a comment or question by calling 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Or, of course, you can continue this conversation on our social media platforms, such as Facebook and Instagram. We have Robert Maxim on the line right now in Washington, D.C. He is a fellow at the Brookings Institution. And Robert, talking with you and our other guest, Liz Malerba, who is also in Washington, D.C. Obviously, this whole debate over discretionary funding versus mandatory funding for tribes, that's really the key to our conversation today, or at least this part of our conversation. And I want to ask you the question I posed you before break. What will it take for Congress to make funding for Indian country mandatory?
Yeah, unlike some of the other policy debates happening in Washington right now, I actually don't think that this conversation breaks down along the kind of typical Democratic-Republican lines. And I don't think that there's any sort of partisan objection from either side to making this happen necessarily. To me, the bigger issue is just a lack of awareness among both policymakers, lawmakers, and the general public around the nuances of funding to Indian country and why these shifts need to happen. And so to me, I see this as something where, there needs to be continued work to raise awareness of these challenges, and in particular, the specific ways that existing funding from Congress negatively impacts tribal communities, whether that is during a shutdown or during kind of more typical times when the government is functioning normally. And you saw that a bit last week during the congressional hearing on the impacts of the shutdown on Indian country, where there was quite a bit of bipartisan shared sense of the need to reform some of the ways that Indian country is funded. And I think both the Republican chairwoman, Lisa Murkowski, and the Democratic vice chair, Brian Schatz, expressed very similar sentiments. So to me, this is less about a partisan divide and more about the need to raise awareness among a broader set of policymakers and the general public about these issues.
All right. Thank you, Robert. Liz, I want to go back to you. What are your thoughts with regard to what it might take Congress to make funding for Indian country mandatory? Do you see any champions in Congress right now that are willing to address this concept in a meaningful way?
Oh, certainly. The hearing last week that Robert just mentioned, during that hearing, Chairman Murkowski referenced our report, and she stated that perhaps now is the time for Congress to fundamentally reexamine how it delivers upon trust and treaty obligations. We're certainly going to revisit that with her and her staff. We've certainly seen congressional appropriators on both sides of the aisle in both chambers who oversee the interior appropriations bills suggest that there is a willingness to revisit some of these issues. Now seems as good and as important a time as any to really try and push this forward.
Liz, what about the educational component here? And we heard Robert touch on it a moment ago. Is there an effort right now, or is there a need for better informing the general public so that they grasp what it means to fund Indian country and how these different programs are funded? Because you still have some people who view much of the funding that goes to Indian country as handouts.
Oh, absolutely. As somebody who advocates on Capitol Hill, one of our greatest challenges is a lack of education for, anyone in the general U.S. population related to the history between the United States and tribes, and why that history necessitates that these obligations be fulfilled. Certainly, additional education for the general public would really, really help with that. Congressional staffers, people serving in the administration, politicians, they're all receiving the same American education by and large. And that education really only touches on a sliver of our history, and it lacks any education or any information related to the modern relationship between the United States and tribal nations. When we go to Capitol Hill, we very often have to start at square one, explaining to Hill staffers, explaining to lawmakers why these payments and services are delivered in the first place.
Liz, what do you anticipate will be the long-term effects of this shutdown on tribal citizens?
Much of that remains to be seen, I would say. I think kind of the broad impacts of a shutdown are economic, both for the United States, economic for tribal nations, economic for our citizens. We know shutdowns cost money. There each kind of layer here, whether you're an individual tribal citizen or you're a tribal nation or the United States government, or another unit of government, everybody is trying to backfill funding or reallocate funding at this point, without a guarantee that that funding is necessarily going to be restored. We're hearing reports of tribal nations taking out lines of credit in order to meet the needs of their people. And that comes with a whole host of issues, including interest payments. It's really a leap of faith, and tribal nations kind of scrambling to do the best they can to continue to serve their people.
Well, I want to ask you more about the tribal nations that you work with and you're hearing from, specifically tribes in the USET region, southern and eastern United States. What are they telling you?
Well, I'd love to give you the example of the Penobscot Nation in Maine. During last week's Senate Committee on Indian Affairs hearing, our board president, who is also the chief of Penobscot, was unable to testify on our behalf. He was working with his tribal council to reallocate hundreds of thousands of dollars to bridge the nutrition gap for their citizens. And that involves, in addition to kind of coming up with this money, asking tribal hunters to donate moose meat to the elders' food pantry so that at least Penobscot's elders can be fed in the meantime. These are extremely visceral stories, and heartbreaking stories, but also, stories of resilience as tribal communities and tribal governance kind of come together to address this problem. But the problem shouldn't exist in the first place. Our funding should not be vulnerable to the partisan bickering that precipitated this and other shutdowns.
Liz, do you know whether there are some areas of the country or perhaps some tribal nations that are more vulnerable to the year-by-year discretionary funding process than others?
Certainly. So I want to say at the outset that trust and treaty obligations to tribal nations exist in perpetuity, and they exist outside of a tribal nation's ability to achieve economic development. But as a practical matter, some tribal nations have been able to be successful in economic development, and therefore, in moments such as these, have reserve funding that they are able to tap. And so you aren't seeing as many kind of early impacts to the nation or its citizens. Conversely, many tribal nations across the United States and in our region are unable to engage in economic development to the extent that they would like. Tribal nations, for many reasons, but including acts of the U.S. government, aren't able to have a tax base. So there aren't reserve funds to tap. And it's in those moments where the shutdown and its impacts are kind of felt most clearly.
All right, Liz, one more question, and then I'm going to go back to Robert. If this shutdown lasts through today, it will officially be the longest shutdown in U.S. history. Do you see any signs that the impasse will break?
Recently, Majority Leader John Thune in the Senate said that he anticipates that an off-ramp may present itself in the near future. Two things have to happen. One is Congress has to reach an agreement about the extension of Affordable Care Act premium tax credits, those tax credits that are provided to people to assist with the purchase of insurance plans on the Affordable Care Act marketplace. There is a bipartisan group of lawmakers in the House that's trying to negotiate the contours of a plan there. But then Congress also needs to determine how it is going to fund the government going forward. And there is talk of a continuing resolution, something that Robert just referenced, kind of flat funding things while the appropriators work out full year continuing appropriations. And we could potentially expect a continuing resolution into either December or January of 26.
All right, thank you, Liz. Robert, back to you. I want to ask you also about research that you've done on tariffs in addition to the funding challenges throughout Indian country. Tell us more. How are people going to cope with the rising cost of food with only partial SNAP benefits?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the challenge. And that's the real precarity that I think a lot of families are facing right now. And, one of the places that has been most affected so far by President Trump's tariffs have been in grocery prices. And a big factor there is, in many cases, the food that we import can't be produced on a regular basis in the U.S. Either, one of the kind of classic examples of this is coffee, which is only grown in one small part of the big island of Hawaii, otherwise isn't grown at all in the U.S., right? And so you see that with a whole bunch of different food products, and especially now with kind of the primary growing seasons in a lot of the U.S. wrapping up, we're going to be facing a period of several months now where the country does rely in large part on food imports. And so we are deliberately choosing to rise prices on food imports at the same time as we're choosing, in many cases, to cut the support that families have for their household food budgets. And that's going to be a really difficult combination for folks to navigate in the coming months.
All right. Thank you, Robert. I want to go back to Nikki Stoops now, who is with the Alaska Federation of Natives. And Nikki, earlier you mentioned just the severity of Typhoon Halong and how it was a pressing topic at the AFN conference last month. I want to ask you now, how is the federal shutdown impacting tribal citizens who have been directly impacted by the typhoon?
Well, while the federal government is working on the immediate response to Typhoon Halong, the shutdown creates further complications and uncertainties for our communities. In the region devastated by the typhoon, many people in the hundreds were forced to evacuate the region, now have this lengthy recovery process that will require substantial engagement with the federal government. Any delay or confusion caused by the shutdown adds to the tremendous burden to our already hurting people in the region. Relief efforts are being supported by federal employees working without pay, which we greatly appreciate these workers' vital contributions, but we want to see them paid for their work, including back pay for their unpaid work these past few weeks.
Nikki, are you talking with any of these federal employees who are not getting paid right now? And if so, what are their most pressing concerns?
Well, the folks that AFN has been working with on the federal government side are very hardworking, compassionate people who are putting the needs of others before their own. And we're very grateful for the efforts, and it takes a village, and that we're putting that to the test right now for sure, that they're putting, the needs of the folks who have been relocated out of their homes to Anchorage to make sure that those needs are met, especially as we approach the winter months and then we approach the holidays.
All right. I think so for so many of us, there's this rule of being an employee that if you don't get paid, you don't work. It's just pretty much as simple as that. How are these folks rationalizing that right now? Going out and obviously they're serving their communities. They have this commitment, but at the same time, they're not getting paid. And at this point, there's no guarantee that they will get paid.
No, but we're very much a people that we take care of each other, and we have empathy, and we can only get through this together. Unity is a big thing that we practice, and not only do we preach, but we practice it in our day-to-day lives. And this is something that, a real life example where coming together is the only way we'll get through it.
All right. Well, with that, we have reached the end of our hour. So I'd like to thank our guests who joined the show today: Liz Malerba, Robert Maxim, Nikki Stoops, and Chairman Joseph James. Please join us again tomorrow as we look at a new online archive that uncovers historical records of enslaved Indigenous people. Until then, I'm your host, Sean Spruce. You've been listening to the one, the only Native America Calling.
Buju gikaganawain dagon jabwate shimaguyen. Ganoje no kida nishinabe akwazi wigamigung jigikendaman dawajge ijichigayan jabwate shimaguyen gedudu shing. Nawaj jigikendaman mawadishawain healthcare.gov/coverage gema ganoj 1-800-318-2596. Gaunde Nagadeg, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services.
Every family caregiver could use help finding the necessary resources to care for their loved one. The AARP Family Caregiver Resource Guide helps family caregivers access key programs, services, and agencies in their communities. A copy of the guide is available by calling 877-333-5885
or online at aarp.org/caregiver resources. AARP supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Quantic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.